All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining. For those of you that don't know me, my name is James Hager. I'm the campaign manager of the Our Future Starts at Home campaign, which is an effort to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot to invest in housing here in our state. I'm really excited to welcome folks to join this conversation, the second in a series of four. And in just a second, I'm going to turn it over to Marisol to lead us for the day. Before we do that, I did want to just kind of flag really quick, recognizing that we've got a 90-minute session here and we're going to be doing work the whole time, but that some folks may not be able to stay through the whole thing. Just kind of want to flag for a second where we're going to go from here after today as we get into the end of this year and into early next year. And so want to be thinking about today as we kind of move through background and preparation and sort of making sure that we're getting our minds and our brains and our thinking around this work, where we're going to go when we start to implement it specific to Minnesota next year. And I'm going to share just a quick slide around some meetings and some process of how we're thinking about that. And then we'll turn it over to Marisol to kick us off and get going. Where is my share screen? Apologize, that's not helpful. Well, I am not going to make you all wait while I fumble, so I'm just going to tell you this, and I'll put some notes in the chat with the information. So what we are wanting to make sure we do is really make sure that we move after today from theory into practice. And so Marisol and the team are going to be kind of finishing up and creating an incredible resource of research for us that will be ready to use in January. And we want to make sure that we're both highlighting the conversations we're going to continue to have with her in January to continue to invest that, to share those Minnesota results and think about how we implement. And then also some work that we're going to be doing individually and collectively to make sure that we're kind of thinking about our organizations and about how we move those things forward. So I'm just going to highlight some dates and then I'm going to put them in the chat, obviously, so that you have them in writing. The first is that the Our Future Starts at Home campaign, which again, many of you are already involved in, but is focused on kind of putting a constitutional amendment on the ballot and fighting for dedicated revenue. We have our next meeting on January 3rd, right away in the new year. And that's going to be a meeting that isn't focused in part on this implementation and how we kind of prepare for really using the work that Marisol and her team are putting together. So we will get that out as we follow up to this webinar to everyone so that whether you've been part of that already or not, you know you're welcome in that conversation. Then we have the other two webinars that Marisol is going to be leading. They are on January 23rd and January 29th. And again, that's where we start to make the shift from this background research and theory and sort of preparation to we've got Minnesota data and we've got to put it to work. And so get those dates in the chat in a second too. And then lastly, we'll just note that Madeline and myself from the Our Future Starts at Home group will be reaching out to both our partners and folks who have been attending this webinar and haven't been involved more broadly about some of the sort of collective work we're doing around implementation of the narrative change work and hoping to have some individual conversations. So look for an email from the two of us trying to set up a time to chat as well. Thank you. Apologize for my technical difficulties. I'll get a couple things in the chat. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Marisol, to lead the work. Thank you.
Super. James, thank you so much. And so excited to join everyone today because today is where we're going to start digging into the work. So we are really going to focus the next 90 minutes on helping you understand the framework that it's going to take to start to advance narrative. As James mentioned in our subsequent sessions, we are going to talk about the research and then how to specifically create and seed our garden with the research. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about the framework and what does that actually look like. So with that, I am going to start sharing my screen. So let's make sure that I do all of this here. All right. Can you all see my screen? Yes? I don't see you anymore.
Not really very
It
well.
looks great, Marisol. Yep, full
Super.
screen.
Right.
It's great.
Thank you all. I may not see you now, so please holler back, go off mute, all the good things, right? But really today we're going to focus on what this looks like to
What?
Oh, Marisol, you're muted. I'm not sure what happened.
How about now?
That's
Oh, you're
better.
good. Now
All
you're good.
right. Weird. Again, thank you for your patience with technical difficulties. Sometimes the Bluetooth goes a little spooky. I'm Marisol Bello, and I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Narrative Lab. We are a national
Excuse me, you gotta share your
communications.
screen again.
Oh, we're not sharing anymore. All right. Well, hang on one second, everyone. Let's make sure that we can do that. You all got me?
Yes.
Yes. All right.
Yep, looks great.
Super. Great. This is our team. You all will be working with them in various capacities over the coming weeks. But the Housing Narrative Lab is a national research and communications organization, and our work is very specific around advancing a narrative of what it means to build housing justice, what it means when people are experiencing housing insecurity and homelessness, and why. So our research and our work with MHP, as James mentioned, is we are conducting a series of narrative research, several of whom, many of you or several of you were involved in our early listening tour and listening sessions. So we are in the process of finalizing that research, and our coming webinars will be looking at the results of that research. We are working to support your work because we want this research to be actionable for you. If you have research and it's sitting in somebody's website and you're not using it, well, that's probably not going to be very helpful. So we are doing this series of trainings. We will be putting together message guides and helping you all figure out how to use this research going forward. So for today, we are going to seed our narrative garden. We are going to look at how we use narrative research as a guide. We're going to learn how to use asset framing and talk about asset framing. And then we're going to dig into stories and messages being the words, the sounds, the visuals that help people understand what we are trying to do. So first, here's the thing, right? When we talk about narrative, the thing we do right now is that we grow a flower at a time. That is to say, we tell stories that aren't always connected, right? We use social media. It's a kind of a one-way bullhorn for our talking points. It can feel a little hit and miss, right? And so it to some extent, it is the equivalent of growing, one flower in the concrete. And so the work that we are doing together is going from this flower in concrete to this. We want to create a vibrant garden, right? We want to know how do we have the tools? What are the tools available to us? How do we use them, right? How to use them properly? How to use them when? What is the context? So it's very similar for those of you that may be gardeners on the call, right? You have to design your garden. You have to know what the ecosystem is that you're working in, how much mulch, the temperature, the sunlight, the water, the tools. We do the same thing with narrative, right? So each of us is literally building a narrative garden here. And this is the work that we are going to be doing today and starting to do today. But first, let's see who's on the call. How about in the chat? Tell us your name, where you live, and one word about what you love about your neighborhood and your community. So name, your org, where you live, and one word to describe what you love about your neighborhood or your community in the chat. Thank you, James, for sharing all of those key dates. All right, Nissa. Nissa loves safety. And then, oh, someone else loves the library. Welcome, Kristen. Your community is thoughtful. Madeline, thank you for you love the flower gardens in your community. Welcome to you. And James and Paul, thank you so much. Oh, I see it. They're coming quickly. I love it. Natalie loves the laughter in her community. I love that. That is fabulous. The diversity and trails. There is so much to love in your communities. in Michigan. The dogs, all right, as a dog person, I'm feeling you on that one. Keep them coming, everyone. Really appreciate that. Love the diversity in your community. That's great. That's a big one, right? We're going to be talking about a lot of these values as we move forward. So please keep them coming, because we're going to follow this chat introduction from all of you with a poll. All right, and my colleague Brian from MHP is going to put the link to the poll in the chat. And here's the poll, thinking about home and thinking about the things you love about your community, right? Which of these 4 quadrants do you most agree with? And you get to answer 1, thinking about you and the place that you live, your communities, your approach to the work. Which one of these do you most agree with? And Brian, it looks like this is the wrong poll. Yep, there you go. All right, which statement do you most agree with? Let's give this one a few minutes as well. So add to the chat and then answer your poll question, please. Brian, you'll tell us when we've got our poll respondents and our poll finished, yes?
I can do that.
All right, super. We'll give folks a few more moments. This is a little toughy, I know. Let's try to get us to at least 85, 90% poll respondents. I know you all have some feelings about this. Let's do it. Let's see what y'all think. All right, last of our stragglers.
Okay, we have 85% of the folks have completed the poll. Would you like me to read out the answers?
Please do.
So for number 1, having a decent place to live is a basic human need. We have 76% of respondents. For number 2, we have 6% of respondents. Number 3, 14%. And number 4, 4%.
I love it. So in our poll, 76% of folks believe that having a decent place to live is a basic human need. That is the statement that you most agree with, and then that's followed up with government should intervene to provide affordable and safe housing for everyone. That is number 3. Wonderful. Brian, thank you so much. So you might be wondering why we had you do this. First, it was because you all just engaged in a focus group, right? So to really, partly to show you show you the importance of research, right? How you talk with folks depends on where they're from, what are the perceptions that they hold, right? The context in which they're working in, the narratives that they already believe in that shape what they think and how they move through the world. So through that exercise, we wanted to really illuminate the point that depending on who you're talking to and the context and the audiences, right, folks are going to interpret information very differently. And we have an opportunity, because of that, to tailor our messages to them accordingly, right? So that research becomes a really important tool to better understand our audiences, meet them where they're at narratively, right? And then from there, start to figure out, how do we frame messages? How do we create framing and messaging to them and then the stories that we tell them based on where they are in the world, right? So the next pieces that we're going to talk about is research, talk a little bit more about research, and when we think about our narrative ecosystem, then we're going to talk about framing, messaging, and ultimately the stories that we tell. Again, this is to help you understand the framework that we will start to build when we want to advance a different narrative in Minnesota. Narrative ecosystem. For those of you that joined us last time around, these series of slides, some of these slides may start to look a little bit familiar, but we at the lab think of a narrative ecosystem, right? And understanding and knowing what that ecosystem is the first step to knowing how to advance narrative in our work, knowing how each of these elements are connected and tied together. Even though the key thing is that they are, many of these pieces are connected and tied together, but they don't mean the same things. And so part of the work we're doing here is some education as well, because sometimes folks conflate things that may not equal each other, but they are very much connected to each other. So when we think about the narrative ecosystem, it starts with research and community values. What is it that our community, what is important in our community? And that question that I asked you what you love about your community, that's the beginning of understanding what your community values. Each of you is a member of your community, and each of you has a value and a thing that you love about living in the place that you live in. The flip side is I could have asked you to name the thing that your community needs to do better. We didn't focus on that for this particular piece because we're going to talk a lot about values. And then we take the questions and your answers, and that's how we start to develop the research. So I want you to think about the narrative research as a map, right? As a sort of think of your Google, it's your Google Maps, right? It helps you figure out what is the path that we are going to take to get to where we need to go, right? It may give you more than one path. So think about when you put in an address in Google, it's going to give you 3 different ways, depending on traffic. If you want to pay for tolls, not tolls, what's the fastest, the one with the fewest lights, right? So your research will help you understand what is the landscape that you are working in and that you are navigating. It's going to give you some clues as to your audiences, right? When we did our question of what of the 4 quadrants do you all support the most? Overwhelmingly, this particular group believe that housing is a human right, but there was a significant number of you, or second group of you, that believe that government has a very deep role to play in this. So we may talk to you both in slightly different ways when we're talking about housing, because how audiences hear the messages that we are providing them is going to be based on who they are and what they already believe. So understanding our audiences is a really key element. And then lastly, understanding which messages advance the narrative most persuasively. That's really a nod to the audience, because some audiences will be moved more by a certain type of framing than a different kind of audience. So those 2 pieces are really kind of tied together. And this is where the research that we are doing with MHP is going to be really key, because we will be working with you all to provide you your Google Maps. So once we do that research and we have the community values, the next step the next piece of the narrative ecosystem that really is looking at framing, right? So the Frameworks Institute defines framing as the choices that we make in what we say and how we say it. It's what we emphasize, how and what we explain, what we say, what we leave unsaid, right? So it's, do we start the story with policy, or do we focus on an individual story? And these choices really matter because they affect how people hear us, what they understand, and how they act. And the science of framing is the thing that helps us to be heard and understood. Not surprisingly, it'll often start, right, with our audiences. So again, framing is the way you present those community values to shape how an audience receives the information. So let's talk a little bit more about framing. So first we've got our research and community values, and then we're going to start building out framing. For those of you that are familiar with journalism, framing is like the angle of a story. I was a journalist. That is my career before I became a narrative specialist, and framing was all about like, what's the angle of the story, right? So think about, there's actually a famous study that looked at people going grocery shopping, and they were shown two different products, two different beef products. Both cost the same, the weight is exactly the same, the cut of meat is exactly the same. One was labeled 80% lean, and the other one was labeled 20% fat. Right? So comparing the two, many people feel that 20% fat sounds like an unhealthy option. So many chose the 80% lean option. But what? They are saying the exact same thing. There was no difference at all between the two products. But the difference was that one sounded more appealing to the other because of what is called the framing effect, right? So this is key. It's not just what you say, it's what people are hearing. That is what framing is. So it's how information is presented to people. People are influenced by how you give them the information. So, for example, in our world, it is talking about budget and numbers versus the aspiration of what you achieve, right? With these budget, with a budget and with numbers. So it is the difference between talking about how this housing project is going to cost us $1.4 billion versus this housing project is going to create opportunity, housing, health, and stability for 700 families. One opens up a scarcity mindset with people. The other one opens up a more abundant, open mindset with folks that helps them understand and see, right, what we're trying to do in a slightly different way. Framing is also about helping us to connect the dots and showing how systems force people into homelessness. Again, this is that piece about what we leave said and unsaid. So in my previous scarcity and abundance conversation, right, where we are maybe talking more about how home is about opportunity and how specific solutions or a housing project will create those opportunities for people because they give kids a safe place to do their homework. It allows parents to be able to take care of their families without being worried about how they're going to pay the rent or where they're going to sleep at night or whether or not they're going to have enough money to pay the rent versus feed their families, right? So framing is all about the kind of mindset that we're trying to get people in. I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about asset framing. And asset framing, for those of you that may be familiar with this phrase, is something that was created by Trabian Shorters. And he says asset framing is about stating their best before the rest. So defining more the aspirations. When we're talking about people, it means defining people through their aspirations, what they're bringing into a community, whether it's specific people or groups of people, right? So here's an example. We talk about a person who chooses to live on the street. That's a framing. And the framing is that this person is a problem. This person is choosing to live on the street. But what if I tell you a story about someone who is staying on the street because their partner is not allowed, their partner of the opposite sex is not allowed into a shelter for only a particular gender or for particular sex? Or what if I tell you this person has a dog and it is their only the only thing that is like their family and that they love, and guess what? Shelters don't allow dogs. So now I've framed this individual from being a problem to a person who is a loving partner or a loving pet owner and can't leave their animal behind. Right? So it's really this idea of leading with a North Star, leading with the person's aspirations. I'm going to give you a little example here. I'm going to let's play this. Hopefully you all can hear it. This is Travian Shorters talking about asset framing. And you cannot hear that, right? So let me just stop my share for a moment. I'm going to try that one more time.
Asset framing is about not defining people by their challenge, right? So once you recognize that I aspire to be a scientist or a leader, or maybe I just aspire to graduate high school, like I have a goal to be a student, right? Whatever that aspiration is, if you acknowledge that aspiration before you go into my various challenges, you're telling a truer story about me, right? I don't run around believing I'm an at-risk this or a low-income that or a high poverty, high crime. Like no one carries around those labels thinking that's how I'm going to face the world, right? What people think about is I want to maybe go to school. I want to maybe someday own a home. I want to maybe possibly get out of this neighborhood or come back to this neighborhood and build. Whatever that person's aspiration is, if you haven't bothered to acknowledge that aspiration before you engage them, then you've made them an object in the sentence. They are a thing to be dealt with, to be moved, to be manipulated. They are not a person. And once you start to engage people as obstacles, once you start engaging people as problems, then recognize that you've now become the problem, right?
And for those of you that may not be familiar with Travian Shorters, he consults, he's a consultant, he works with businesses and philanthropy, and his work has really been about how to help people engage more in asset framing, both in telling the stories of individuals as well as positing our solutions in a slightly different kind of way. So here are some examples of asset framing, embracing and replacing. Some of this may seem familiar to many of you as you all are doing some of your work as well. Here's a really good example. Define people by their aspirations and their contributions, present people with dignity, versus calling people underprivileged or disadvantaged or vulnerable. Because that actually, whether we mean to or not, we're reinforcing some of the negative stereotypes and stigmatizing the very people that we are working with, right? Leading with an aspirational statement versus a problem statement. We all know about values, or many of us, especially in Minnesota, where you all are doing so much of this work pretty deeply, understand about values-based messaging versus starting with a problem statement. So that would be, the problem statement would be naming the disparity, for example, without attributing some responsibility to the source of the problem. Here are some other examples using people first language. We want to use people first language versus describing people through their deficits, low income, homeless, etc. Right? And again, we've had a lot of these conversations, particularly around the language of homelessness and unhoused, emphasizing assets, aspirations, contributions, solutions versus, right, more of a focus on the problem. And I know some of you, I know some of you will appreciate that very much, and you probably have seen this in either our own communications and in communications of others, that as a field in the housing world, not just in Minnesota, but nationally, we tend to want to focus a lot on the problem and not on the solution as much. And for me, it's kind of the equivalent of telling people, we are on a sinking ship and we want you to come join us. And folks are like, nah, we're good. I'm gonna stay on the land. Thank you very much, right? But if we're positioning aspiration and solution, we're framing people in a very different kind of way. We're getting them in the right right frame of mind. And then naming the root causes of the problems, right? Versus skipping some context. So we make some leaps sometimes in our explanations because we all understand it, but folks that may not be in our field may not understand it as readily. So I want to do a quick little exercise that we will ask Brian to put a link for us to a Jamboard where we want to see, how do you practice asset framing, or how do you fall into deficit framing in your work? And there should be 2 pages that you'll see. And then I'm going to stop sharing my slides and share that Jamboard for us. So I think you all can see it. Yes? All right. Just feel free on the left-hand side there, you'll see a little rail. Pick a sticky note, and on that first page, how do you practice asset framing? And then if you click the arrow in the center of the page, you'll see, how do you fall into deficit framing in your work? So jump in. Would love to see what people are thinking. Super. Thank you so much. I'll take a few minutes on this one. I love it. How do you practice asset framing? How do you practice deficit framing? Someone wrote, messaging to donors, we have a crisis, give us your money, even though we don't know how to solve for the crisis yet. Here's a really good example of deficit framing, right? Scarcity mindset. Yep. I love it. Let's dig into some of these. I really love how you all are practicing asset framing, talking about shelter guests in terms of their strengths and skills, introducing a person and dreams before challenges and diversity. I love that. For those of you that were on one of our previous calls, we use an example. I love this documentary called Lift that just came out this year. And Lift is a documentary about children in New York City, in the Bronx, which is where I'm from, so not surprising, but children from the Bronx who want to be ballet dancers. They want to be ballet dancers for ballet, national and international ballet companies. And these children face challenges because they live in shelters. And that documentary is about the creation and the creativity and the passion and the work about being ballet dancers and the challenges of being able to do all of that while also still dealing with, where am I going to sleep at night, right? So I love that whoever included that, introduce a person in dreams before their challenges and diversity. If you all get a chance, Lift, L-I-F-T, highly recommend it. I like community-based solutions. I love that. People know what they need. Nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us. That is great. We had a webinar yesterday where we brought in some journalists that lead a newsroom called Afro LA. And that was a key tenet of how they approach the news in terms of whose stories they are telling, who are the people that they quote. We can employ any of these elements in almost all of our work. Let's jump over to the deficit framing, where we're recognizing that we still have some growth edges, right? The sky is falling. This is the equivalent of, please join us on the Titanic, right? acting like we are further along in the work than we are, and that we know better. That's some real talk right there, right? Asking people to trust us. That's an interesting one. I don't know who wrote that, but I'm wondering if that's asking people to trust us in a way that positions our work as saviors. I don't know if maybe whoever added that may want to add that to the chat or not. Being more willing to say I'm sorry than take the time to remove the deficit frame. Yeah, oh, I really love that. You know why? Because that's one of the keys, particularly when we are working with people with lived experience, and what that actually means when we're working with people with lived experience, that they are the ones who own their stories, not us on a blog post, because we're trying to get a funder going. Fearing legal action instead of taking action. Sometimes the root cause explanations are cut in the need for brevity. I love that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how we talk about those root causes. Focusing on how bad the deficits are. Man, that's a real one, right? And we do that pretty consistently, and we need to do some more work there. So thank you for sharing all of these with us. Let's jump into, oops. Okay, looks like some of my screen here is leaving me, so just bear with me for a moment. All right. All right, folks, hang on one second. A little bit of a momentary hiccup there, so just bear with me for one moment. Not quite sure why that happened. Oh, I think I see what the issue is. All right, thank you all for your patience. Ah. All right. Serious up, this is Zoom Life. All right. Talked a little bit about deficit framing and how important it is to our work. Let's talk a little bit now about messaging, right? These are the words, the images, the sounds we use to tell stories that advance our narratives. That's the next layer of our narrative ecosystem. So we're going to talk, this is where we're going to dig in a little bit into some of that narrative framework that we've talked about. The first thing we want to do through asset framing, we want to establish a shared value. No matter what we look like, where we come from, we want what's best for our families, right? So establishing that shared value is going to be so key. For many of you, this particular example may look familiar, but again, we want what's best for the people we love.
In Minnesota, we know long winters. And we know how to dig our neighbors out of the snow. Because whether it's our first Minnesota winter or our 50th, we've all been there. So when certain politicians want to divide us and make us afraid, we know that means they've got nothing else to offer. We're on to them. There are lots of ways to be Minnesotan, and all of them are greater than fear. In Minnesota, we're better off together. Vote greater than fear between now and November 6th.
I know that's an example for many of you that will be familiar, because this was some great work that was done in 2018 with Anat Shenker-Osorio and her team, and many of the Minnesota partners that were working that year. And how's that for shared values, right? Who we are as Minnesotans, we're greater than fear, right? So establishing a shared value, and this is going to be really important for us when we start talking about housing and the opportunity to thrive, and how our communities benefit when we all have a safe place to call home. When we think about that narrative framework, 1, establish shared values. 2, lean into unity and community. Here's another really wonderful example that really names race. And this is also for those of you that are familiar, the race class narrative is seminal, right? It is foundational to how so many of us are working in this space. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I highly recommend it. It is work that Anat Shenker Osorio did with Demos back again, I think it was in 2016, 17, 18, but it really was the foundation for a lot of the narrative work when we are talking about race and class specifically. And here's another really strong example that leans into unity, this one also from Minnesota.
Our faith teaches us that we must see ourselves in each other
and strive to treat our neighbors as we wish to be treated. This is the Minnesota we believe in.
a place where people of all shades and of all faiths
Aim to build a better future for those to come.
Yet there are a powerful few who seek to maintain and increase their power by turning us against each other.
Based on what we look like, where we come from, or how we worship.
We will not fall for their distractions. We are greater than the fear they seek to instill in us.
When we stand up for each other, we can create a Minnesota that works for everyone. Will you vote with us?
Again, another example from the greater than fear work that was done, but it really is about creating a unity of purpose. Someone put in the Jamboard the us versus them, and here is a great example of how we are creating us, right? Creating a unity of purpose, describing people working together to solve, in our case, it will be to build housing, to make sure that everyone has a safe home that they can afford, to create communities where people can thrive, create communities that are vibrant. So telling the story of us rather than the story of them. Incidentally, this example, this sort of split screen example, there's this great and famous Nike ad, and maybe Sarah on my team who's on our call could put the link to that ad in the chat, but it is all about how we can come together around sports, and it uses a very similar technique. And the reason I use this example was so that then we can show you the Nike ad. I'm not going to do it in this case, but I hope that you all save that link, because you can see that we actually can use the tools of big ad marketing and use them for our purposes. And in that, this is a really prime example where an ad from Nike, and here you created something very similar, or your partners created something very similar. Go on offense. Oh, I don't know, whoever's off mute, can you go on mute for a moment, because we can hear some background noise there. Go on offense. Please don't repeat the opposition, right? Please don't repeat the misinformation that we're trying to counter. Be direct, but avoid reinforcing the stigma and myth. So instead of saying people don't choose to be homeless, you can reframe that by saying this person couldn't join a shelter because they have a dog, and dogs don't allow shelters in their spaces, right? Avoiding wonky numbers, programs, all the wonk things that we engage in, right? So affordable housing versus ensuring everyone has a place to live that they can afford to pay for. Talking about home versus housing. Housing really does a lot to reinforce that commodity frame. Talking about home elicits a different kind of reaction from folks. The mindset, that framing of home is very different than one of housing. So really thinking about that reframing where you don't repeat the opposition and you speak, you write and tell stories and communicate the way you speak, not just in sort of that wonky way. So here's an example. Most people experiencing homelessness in a given area are either from the community that they come from or had been living there for multiple years before they lost their housing. And that's an example of what to say versus saying, repeating it's not true that the people that are experiencing homelessness don't come from here, right? So we're not repeating that negative frame, but we're actually saying that our neighbors are actually our neighbors. They grew up in this area, or they've been living in this area for quite a while. Here's another example that I really love, right? I think we know this one. There's no place like home. Here's how the field may talk about it. Individuals who have experienced homelessness and are placed in permanent supportive housing are found to have generally positive effects on health and well-being as a result of their stable environment. One is going to frame very differently than the other. So thinking about some of that simplicity in our language is going to be really important as well. Although I do want to say that someone did lift up that in one of the Jamboard comments about how we often will ignore the root causes in order to get to that kind of simplified version. And some of what we want to talk about is how we talk about those root causes, right? So if we talk about them in this very wonky way, we're going to lose people. So really thinking about how do we talk about root causes in ways that will help people understand them more. We're going to talk about that in a few more moments. Showing lived experience. So really, this is the showing the connection between insecurity, housing, jobs, showing the connection between housing and health and well-being, housing and education, housing and our community and our safety, right? Housing as jobs, showing, don't telling. I include this example here. This is actually an example about a man who is experiencing homelessness, but I thought it was a very powerful example of what we mean when we say hearing from people who are closest to the issue, leading and being closest to the solution. So here's someone who used actually the Nextdoor app to talk to his neighbors about community. So I'm going to play this for you all so you can hear a little bit.
There's a lot of people, they'll give you these looks that are, you know, not really accepting. And of course, you're out there, you're grimy, you know, walking around all day in the heat, you're gonna look a certain type of way.
So the other day, he broke out the Nextdoor app again and talked to his neighbors. I'm the guy you see every day if you go to the park, he wrote. I'm not a rude person. This park has become my home, and it's all of yours too. I'm human, just homeless.
Nobody ever really comes up and talks to me. So, you know, it just kind of frustrated me, and I wanted to like let everyone know, like, hey, I'm willing to say hi and work with you, you know?
And instead of ignoring the homeless guy in the park, Keller got replies, lots of them.
Your willingness and effort to make others around you more comfortable when you must be the most uncomfortable you've ever been is amazing to me. The world needs more of you.
And I use that example because it, many people use Nextdoor, right? That's a national platform for many communities. Sometimes it is a cesspool. And here's someone using that platform to say and to show to folks, I am your neighbor and you walk right by me and you never look at me, right? So I think that is so key because we as people communicate and absorb information through stories, not through facts and figures. And we will talk a little bit more about stories as well. And here, I'll just pop to name root causes. Root causes are so key, right? Showing the why, showing the history of exclusionary policies, being really clear about what and how the solutions are when we understand the root causes. So here's a good, here's an example of one of the pieces is, this was a article that was in the New York Times, and it talked about a person who was making a pretty decent salary in her, you know, something like $70,000, $80,000. And she and her daughter lived in their car. And so, you know, she has this quote here. It's the irony of working and making a nice income and still not being able to afford housing. She makes $32 an hour and some per hour. And even still, she finds herself struggling. And we're seeing this story a lot, is that rising rents, jobs are not paying enough. Those are examples and ways that people can really understand what the root causes are. So explaining those root causes are going to be really key, but thinking about how do we do that in ways where we don't reinforce the wonk, we don't use numbers, we don't use our bureaucratic, highfalutin policy language. We want to bring in as many people as possible and help them understand the real solution. So how are we framing those root causes? Naming the solutions.
My name is Kathleen.
Pause this one for a second. So we name the root causes, we want to focus on solutions. Again, this is all part of our asset framing conversation as well. So you can see how we're really building out this framework when we are starting to think about how we advance narratives, giving people the North Star. What are we trying to attain? A safe home for a safe and quality home for everyone, safe and clean shelter, access to healthcare, thriving neighborhoods. So being able to give people examples of those systemic successes to counter the tendencies that our audiences have around some of these issues, or some of the perceptions that our audiences have, right? In housing, for example, it's around that scarcity mindset. We want to show people like we together can do this thing. So really emphasizing that we all have the power and the responsibility to address these issues, and we can do that at a policy level with our varying solutions. So here's an example also from one of your recent housing campaigns in Minnesota.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Anderson, and I am a social worker, activist, and mother to 3 young children in Highland Park, St. Paul. We are recent first-time homeowners, and I am saying yes to rent stabilization. We love our neighborhood, mostly because of the way it has welcomed us as newcomers. Even with the pandemic throwing up all sorts of barriers, we feel deeply valued and integrated into our community. As an activist, I am deeply moved by the civic engagement of my neighbors and the ways they show up for one another. We also just love the centrality, the walkability, and all of the beautiful gardens and green spaces. I want our neighbors who rent to feel just as rooted and valued as we do, and that's why I'm voting yes for rent stabilization by November 2nd. Thank you.
I love that video, and the work that was happening in St. Paul 2 years ago was so really engaged in a lot of that narrative work as well. And you can see she's an activist. She was involved and involved in organizing this work, but she talked about her neighborhood, being a first-time homeowner, talking about the walkability, wanting her neighbors to also be seen and be a part of her community. That's the way, those are ways we want to be thinking about the work in the housing space. And this one, clearly it was around a very specific community and a very specific campaign, but these are elements that can be used when we're talking about advancing narrative change on any one of our issues. I'm going to show you one more example, actually, about this one is call to action. I know I got a lot of organizers on this call, and so none of this will be surprising for any of you, but providing a compelling call to action is going to be a really key piece of our narrative framework, right? Giving people something to do. Folks need to know that they're, that they're part of the story as well, and that they can do something. And we can go broad and aspirational, as in together we can demand proven solutions, or we can go even more specific, as El Burrito Mercado in St. Paul did. And in El Burrito Mercado, they did a taco special, call to action, okay? Buy tacos, and half of the sales on this go to Housing Equity Now in St. Paul. And I included it because I just thought it was fun, but we all can do the wide range of all of this, right? We can join a thing, we can learn about a thing, we can vote about a thing, we can call legislators, sign petitions, we can share social posts, follow us, donate, buy tacos, right? The range and the breadth is pretty broad. And then the key thing that we want to be thinking about in our framework is being really clear on our goals and our audiences. When we are thinking about this framework, what is it that we're trying to do and why, and who are we talking to? And this is really key because different messages move different people. So how about we do one more Jamboard? So thinking about all of those pieces of those frameworks, of the framework, excuse me, which framework essential do you all want to work on, right? What are you implementing already, or what do you want to work on? So here we'll have our colleague Brian put the link in the chat again. Right. Which framework essential do you want to implement or are already implementing? And which one do you find essential? I'm sorry, and which essential have you found most effective? So feel free to add in the chat, because as you can see from your examples in Minnesota, you all are already doing this work. Many of you are already doing this work. And so much of what we are going to be doing is building that framework for housing writ large in Minnesota. So what framework essential do you want to implement? Do you want to see you or your organization doing more of? And which are you already implementing? Do you all have access? Can you jump on that link?
I think people are looking for the essentials again.
Yes. There you go.
There was a slide before this that had the essentials.
Yes, right here. Woo. All right, there you go, all of them. Can you see it? All right. Super. There you go. So shared values, leaning into community, going on offense, showing lived experience, naming root causes, focus on solutions, call to action. Knowing your goals, knowing your target audiences. Which of these are you already using? And which of these you want to do more of? Oops, sorry, I just meant to do that, not this. I want you all to be able to see this. There you go. Yeah, establishing shared values. I love to see so many of you are already implementing or focusing on that shared value piece. That's so critical when we think about, even just as people, when we are connecting with people, right? We talk about where we're from. Are we parents? Are we, what does that look like? Oh, thought maybe I lost you there for a second, but we're really focusing on what do we share with this person, right? So even when we're meeting new people, we do this. Focusing on solutions. How important is that, right? That's that North Star. Giving people the North Star. Helping people understand the root causes. That's such an important one. Yep, providing easy access, providing easy access for people can, how people can be a part of the action. Yep. How they can be heroes in the story. So important, because a lot of people do this, will engage with us because they want to be a part of the community. They want to be a part of something. People want to be a part of something, but they kind of have to understand what the something is or why we need them to be a part of it, right? The ones that you all have found to be most effective: shared values, leaning into unity and community, naming root causes, stories. Well, that's the next one we're going to talk about, is stories. That's a really good segue for us. So feel free to keep them going, or also include them in the chat. I'm going to jump actually a little bit to the last piece because I want to leave some time for questions. The last piece is storytelling, right? Stories are how we communicate. It is a fundamental and essential piece of being a human being. We build trust through stories, connection, and empathy. And stories for us really are the single most powerful tool in our toolbox. When we think about this narrative framework, stories are so elemental to that. And the thing about stories that we want to always remember is that people think in stories, they absorb information in stories, they don't absorb information in facts and figures only. We need to use facts and figures, but when we bring them in as part of a story, people will absorb it more. Also, stories are what allow us to build trust with each other and build a relationship with an audience that we're trying to engage to take action. And this is really key because we always talk about we need to bring people in through their hearts and minds. The reality is that people act first on their hearts and then their minds follow. People act based on how they feel. And so I love this quote by Maya Angelou, who says, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And this is to the point of bringing people into our movement, organizing people, helping them to understand why they need to engage in our issue. And this is important because, again, people act based on how they feel, not just how they think. How they think will follow how they feel. For us, it means that when we are moving people in stories, we want to engage the part of their emotions that help them think about pride in their community. Greater than fear means that we as Minnesotans are greater than fear. We are people that really engage together in community. Hope, right? That lovely video of the two people that are of faith, right? How we together as a community can engage in something. Humor. This one is a little sensitive. If you're funny, go for it. Like our friends in Minnesota who are doing the theater work around homelessness. We featured them in our last conversation. We want to elicit love. Love is so powerful. Think of Love is Love and the fight for marriage equality. That wasn't about rights, right? Rights were talked about pretty consistently. And it wasn't until folks started talking about love and family and togetherness that whole movement started to shift. Awe, empowerment, those are emotions that can move people to action. Anger, fear, sadness, sadly, those are often emotions that we use a lot in our spaces, but we should be thinking about how to use them a little more sparingly. And part of that is because these are emotions that move people to think in more closed ways. And for our work, we want people to think more broadly. So we're going to do one last exercise here, and this is a poll. So what emotions are most used in stories connected to your work? And Brian will put the link up. This one will be We'll do a quick and easy. We'll just keep it open for maybe 2 minutes. What emotions are most used in stories connected to your work? And Brian will share the link. I'm going to back up one so you can see, go back and we can see what emotions do we mostly use? Pride, hope, humor, love, awe, empowerment. What emotions do you see? Anger, fear, sadness? What do you see more in our work? And I actually can't see the poll, so I hope you all can vote on the individual and the individual emotion. We'll keep it open for 1 more minute. These are stories that you see that your organization is engaged in. These are stories that you're seeing about housing work. Could be stories that you see in journalism and news media. All right, Brian, let's put a pause on that one now. What are you seeing? What are some of the results?
One second while I get it pulled up here.
All right, super.
We're seeing joy, humor, faith, hope, joy, happiness, hope, empowerment, pride, gratitude, empathy, love, a lot of hope, sadness, anxiety. I think there's a note about a lack of emotion, gratitude, humor, and then I think pride as well. So
Super. Brian, thank you so much. And it also, I'm not surprised by some of the responses. It's so great to hear because so many of you are already engaging in values when it comes to advancing narrative. So it's wonderful to hear that folks are using hope a lot. Humor, like I said, humor is one of those things that we always need to, if you can do it well, it is such a great way to help people to start to open how they think about something. So think of like all the Daily Show, for example, is a really good example of that. You know, in terms of cognitive science and behavioral science, we know that when people feel good about something, they're going to want to engage in it more and they will engage in it for longer. When people are feeling anxiety, sadness, fear, anger, those can be emotions, and part of why we say use them sparingly. Those can be emotions that will actually, they will move people very well, but they will move them in a short amount of time. So if what we are trying to do is build movement for the long haul and shift how people are thinking about an issue for the long haul, then the emotions that will keep people in our work longer are those feelings that help them feel good about being a part of this movement, feel good about being part of the movement for the long term. So we will wrap up. We just did our poll. We're going to do a discussion, but I actually just want to jump straight to this final piece because I want to open it up to some questions. I want you to remember when you think about stories, they have a beginning, middle, and end. Right now, a lot of us in our field in housing, we talk in talking points or vignettes, but we don't give stories beginning, middle, and ends. Stories, think of the stories that you love, right? That you read about, that you watch. They have a hero. They have somebody doing a thing who is going to be changed or shifted, and they face a challenge. In our world, the challenge is the root cause, right? They always have solutions. What happened? How did this person or people or group or issue survive and thrive? And a call to action. Every good story gives the people that are absorbing the story something to do and that they are a part of. And lastly, they're authentic, that speak write the way you speak, tell stories the way you speak becomes really important. So I'm going to stop here because I want to make sure that we use our last minutes to let me stop sharing. All right. For questions, thoughts, comments. This is our narrative. This is the narrative framework. This is what we will be digging into when we meet again on January 29th, because January 23rd is when we're going to talk about the findings, the research findings, and then January 29th will be actually filling out that framework using your research. So if this framework is what the garden is going to look like, January 29th is when we're going to start choosing the kind of flowers and all of that good stuff. So feel free to go off mute and ask questions, put them in the chat, offer any feedback to maybe some of the work that you are already doing and how you can start to apply some of this work, or maybe you are already applying it. And again, don't have to be Minnesota nice. Please jump in, go off mute, do the thing.
Hi, my name is Sadia Omar. I am with New American Diploma Center. My question is, the research, where are you doing the research? Like what communities are you gathering information from?
That is such a great question. Thank you so much. We did this research in 3 phases. The first is what we call a listening tour of the variety of stakeholders in Minnesota. This is statewide research. So we are doing, it was geography, rural, urban, elected leaders, people with lived experience, the breadth of the diversity and ethnicity, both race and ethnicity in Minnesota, the class and economic diversity as well. So our listening sessions engaged in that wide variety. And then we did a series of focus groups where also we were engaging in that kind of work. And that was, again, statewide. So we had people based on their race and their ethnicities, their geographies, their income levels, their ownership, non-home ownership, home rental, and then the quantitative research that was the qualitative focus group work. And then the quantitative research is a sample of, I believe it is 500 or 600 Minnesotans across the state, where we will be asking them many of these questions. And again, making sure that we've oversampled. That has particular oversamples, I believe, for Black Minnesotans. And James might, if it was another oversample, please correct me. But we did some oversampling as well, so that we could make sure that we had a wide variety of voices, because that was going to be really important in the research. Thank you so much.
The other oversample there was just greater Minnesota and making sure that we have a lot of voices from across the state.
Thank you.
It's your geography. Thank you, James. I know there was one more and my brain kind of missed it for a moment. But Teddy, that's a really great question, because we know in research, just big, not in our research, but research big, that there can be some biases, and we make sure that we are completely eliminating those biases so that we could have a true breadth and diversity of the communities where we are doing the research. It looked like, did somebody, Madeline, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to share, this is more of a reflection on the value of this work. One of the things that's exciting to me about anyone who chooses to do it is we become a chorus. We have an opportunity to really change our future when we use this tool together. One of the cool things about this project is we all get to win. All Minnesotans will benefit from this, and all of our organizations will benefit as well. And I just thinking about storytelling methods, like I'm a hopeful person. So that is, I just wanted to share that. It's incredibly exciting to me.
I love it, Madeline. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I vote for Madeline being way in the front there, leading with this really exciting thing, because even just in how you were talking about it, Madeline, is really exciting because it is about all Minnesotans coming together to talk about this. How do you get more foundational than where you live? That's all about the communities that you're creating, belonging. It is about economic justice and racial justice. All of the elements come into a very key place, which is where we all live in the communities that we are trying to build. So thank you for that. Other questions, other thoughts and some feedback. It looks like someone added some. Oh, thank you, Sarah, for adding that in the chat. Yep. Any other questions, thoughts on how maybe each of you are thinking about how you will start applying some of this work when it comes? Be curious to hear that feedback from you. Scarlett.
Thank you. How you kind of described earlier about staying away from the negative connotations and steering away from repeating some of that negativity. I think that it's interesting that, you know, up where I am in Grand Rapids in the northern part of Minnesota, that a lot of people sometimes forget about unless they have a cabin here, is that a lot of our local governments are still in the mindset of, you know, being dismissive, that housing is not an issue. We don't have housing problems. And these are the same kind of conversations that are going, like, why do we need to learn about this when it's already happened? Or we don't need that kind of housing, or those people. So it's very kind of interesting to help construct a narrative that's both, you know, productive and informative without reinforcing some of those negative connotations. So it's insightful that you brought it up, but it's also very thought-provoking too, when we have an incredible amount of NIMBYism in our area.
Scarlett, thank you so much for lifting that up, because the NIMBYism is so real, and it is so big, and not just, I will say, not just in Minnesota, that it's very clearly an issue that the housing field is facing nationwide. But again, it's when we think about how fundamental housing is to all of us that we can start to think about, like, we have people on our side. Folks get how important housing is, and we need to think about how are we talking about housing in a way that folks will hear us. There's actually a famous pollster who says it's not what you say, it's what people hear. Right? And that's to the point of how different audiences hear things differently based on how they're moving through the world. And we can engage people and move them through a ladder of engagement, i.e. organizing them around some of these issues, when we are able to use all of these elements of narrative. And that includes elected leaders, right? Because at the end of the day, we need those elected leaders to make the right choices, do the right things, right? So much of this is about the choices that they make. So Scarlett, thank you so much for lifting that up. Others, we have 7 more minutes, and I want to make sure that that we get to your questions, your feedback, maybe some of your concerns. You know, if folks maybe have some concerns that they want to raise about how to use the research going forward, either concerns or you know, Marisol, when you all join us on January 29th, here's what I want to know about how to use the research, because that also will help us a lot in terms of making sure that we're providing you exactly what you're looking for and what you need and how you would use it. So this is a really great time to speak up and let us know. I know you have some thoughts.
I would say, use this research to educate lawmakers, especially those coming out from rural area, denying, there's no housing crisis in rural area when there is even no shelters in some of the areas. People who are facing homelessness, nonprofit organizations are struggling to help out. So it would be nice to use for educational purposes.
Okay. Thank you, Sadia. That's really good to know. Really appreciate that. Yeah, we'll be
Hi,
taking
great
notes
day
on
to you.
that.
Thank you for this platform. My name is Ms. Marla. I'm with the SHIP Collaborative here. And one of our members, Ms. Renee Rock, informed us about this platform. And so that's why I'm here. So this is very new to me. Appreciate you and appreciate the Housing Narrative Lab. One of the thoughts that I would share, because there were many, this was very informative, especially being new to this, so I appreciate that, was how shelter is looked at. And when you were speaking on utilizing the example of not being able to have your partner in shelter, however, when you said about having your dog, so ironically, within the last week, 2 weeks, I watched TikTok, and there was a gentleman that came across on there, a white gentleman came across with his dog, and they were homeless. And so I was thinking about that when you mentioned that. That is reason why some people, probably more than we think, who have a pet, and most of the time it is a doggy, and they don't go into shelter because their pet means that much to them. And it's sometimes just their only family that either they have or that they connect with. They could have other family, but they're not in communication. And when you said that, I was thinking that would be a great idea of changing the shelter status system, of having a shelter where you can do that so that you don't have to be, but even to go a step further to be able to house a person so they don't even have to be concerned with having to go and look for shelter. So let me plug that in there. So thank you so much. I appreciate this. Thank you, Renee. I think she's on. So thank you for this. So, yeah.
Ms. Marla, thank you so much for that. And thank you, Renee, as well, for joining us. I really appreciate that. I think that's key, right? What a reframe, because we reframed that person, for example, right? We framed that person from being seen as a problem and choosing to be homeless. I mean, come on now, let's be real. Who chooses to be homeless, right? Versus someone who's is out there because the one person or a dog, right? The one thing they love more than anything else can't actually go with them. So thank you, Ms. Marla, for lifting that up. Michael, it looks like you also raised your hand. Michael Dahl at home.
Yeah, so I love this. I love the framing. I want us to be using it. I do have a question about how and when do you call something out that needs to be called out?
I love that question.
Okay.
Do you have a specific example or specific issue, or do you want me to just respond more generally?
It can be more general, but we have people who think that renters don't live in homes; they live in apartments. Is an example of something where I just feel like we need to. That's not a really tense issue of calling out, but it is something that we come up against in the world that I work in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. So I will answer that in two parts. One is continuing to talk about home as a place where we have love, home as a place where we have safety, home as a place where we thrive, have stability. So that broad thinking of there's no place like home becomes really key for all of us to create that chorus that I think Madeline was mentioning, right? That's the first thing. That's a low level one. And then the second one is when you think about, let's think about trolls, right? Online, really positioning, not engaging with trolls, for example, but talking about how, I don't know about you, but I want my community to do well. I don't know about you, but I want my community to be vibrant and I want everyone to feel included and accepted. So that's another way that you can do that, particularly online. A third way that is a little bit more direct is we'll use an example of there is a significant amount of asylum seekers that are coming to American cities. And that is creating some tension between people that are already there who are experiencing homelessness and the asylum seekers who also need places to live. And in some of these communities, elected leaders are actually pitting people, vulnerable people, right? People in need against each other. And so being able to say this is an opportunity for all of us as a community to come together to make sure that all of us are safe and have a home, and not for people to be pitting people against each other, pitting people in need against each other. So we started with the value and then we went into the problem. And the problem in this case was actually naming that people are blaming each other, or that people in power are using this as a moment to blame each other. So that's maybe a small example for you. And I think we can do one more because I see Cynthia has her hand up and I want to make sure, Cynthia Elmore, that we get to that last one. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Thank you, Marisol. Dr. Marla, I just want to say I really appreciated your thoughts and what you said, and everything that I have heard so far sounds really good to me. I've been off and on this time of year. My work is really heavy due to the amount of grief people are in trauma, through the violence in this community and around here, connected to people that are known in the community. So I've been really busy. I just would like to say that I am so excited about the data and cannot wait to be able to use it to draw analogies. I would like to draw the analogies of different barriers and different communities when it comes to homelessness and other things that people are dealing with. Because I don't know if you guys know, but in my experience of being homelessness, it was not a issue of paying my bills or not paying my bills on various times. One time it was because the rodents, one time it was because my substance use disorder. One time it was because an incident had happened in the neighborhood and I was fearful, mental health. One time, somebody was dying and I didn't care about nothing else. So, what I'm saying, throughout my years of being, it wasn't just, and sometimes if they're undiagnosed and there's a lot of stuff going on, and sometimes people, they just don't have the capacity, and it's up to us and others out there to go out there to the ones in the encampments, the ones downtown, whatever, to advocate and bring things to them, to kind of help in any way we can.
Thank you so much. And that's such a key piece of when we're telling the story about people with lived experience and doing it in a respectful way that is not transactional. So I really appreciate you lifting that up. I know that we are 3 minutes over, so I want to say thank you all so very much for hanging in there with us for those 3 extra minutes. We will see you on January 23rd when we will dig into the research. And then on January 29th, we're going to start making our gardens. We're going to start building those gardens, growing those gardens. And we are here for it and looking forward to seeing all of you. Happy December breaks. Thank you, everyone.
Yep.
Thank
Happy
you.
holidays, everybody.
You